subscribe to my non-existent channel. Oh. All right. Well, thanks for coming. This is a this project is something that I had at a client maybe like 8 months ago, and I had no idea what it was, and just kind of had to go with it, and wanted to gather my thoughts, and been wanting to do that for a while, and it just so happened that I just needed a deadline, which was yesterday. So please excuse any little ticks. Okay, so Flutter. What is Flutter? Well, it's supposed to be a single code base for iOS and Android, but it can also do web and some desktop stuff too, and that's all because of the Dart programming language. How is it built? Oops. It uses C++. I think like all these things always go down to C and C++, but it has Dart, and then it uses this 2D rendering engine, which you may have heard of, which I had never heard of, called Skia, or no one's heard of? Okay, great. It's a 2D rendering engine, happens to be used in Chrome as well, and since this is all Google-based, it makes kind of some sense. It is shipping with a modern framework. If you know React, a lot of these like high-level conversations start to make a lot of sense. You start looking at the code, and it'll start making sense what things are. They have different names, but they are very similar. And it is designed to be layered and customizable. So to do that, they do this thing for performance called aggressive composability, which I've been practicing for the last 24 hours. What that basically means is everything is a widget, which would be like a component in React, and everything is built of other widgets, and there is just a widget of widget of widget all the way for this entire page, and they keep those widgets very simple, and it makes it easy for them to traverse this tree and compile everything for the page. Example is the padding widget. Maybe on Android or iOS, you may have a text view that has a padding property or something. You don't have that in Flutter. You have another widget called padding, and that wraps your text view so that you can add padding. I have a little bit of code to show you, and there it is. These are all our different widgets. This is a class. We've all seen classes before at this level. It is a stateless widget. It doesn't have any state. It has, you override your build, which returns, surprise, a widget. Material app is a designed widget for material style apps. They have another one for iOS called, I think it's Cupertino, that you can use as well. Here's a simple title. The home and scaffolding is your basic app, which has a title at the top, and your body, which is, here's your app bar, which has an app bar widget, which needs a title with a text widget. And for your body, here's a center widget with Hello World right in the middle. We all love Hello World. And how is it packaged? So for Android, they compile their code down to a NDK project and then put that into an Android project for an APK. APK is the executable of the Android world for right now. And iOS, they do the same kind of pattern where they compile down to an ARM library and put it into a runner iOS project and put that into an IPA, which is an executable like for iOS. So when this app is launched, the Flutter library loads the code and controls things from there. This may sound familiar if you're in the mobile land. This is similar to a game engine. When you write a game with C++ or something, you'll have a like a parent app that will load your code for you so that you can do that. And that's where Google's really focusing, is like, this is very similar to a game engine.
Is the Dart code compiled or
it can be, you were asking.
Is the Dart code compiled or interpreted?
It is compiled for when it's on the app, but it can do both. I believe, if I did my homework correctly, Dart is the next topic. Dart is this modern, concise, object-oriented language. When they first started writing Flutter, they actually used Swift. And they were very afraid. This is where I always say like licensing and money come into play with code. They were afraid that this was before Apple open sourced Swift. And they were afraid that if Apple found out what they were doing, that they would get in some trouble. Like Apple would do something to mess up with them. So they just picked something else and they ran across Dart, which is a Google language. And they didn't even tell the Dart team they were doing. They would just casually start writing them questions. And before they got to 1.0, like there was some like styling issues where like, we don't know why the Dart team's doing this, so we'll just kind of ask them here and there. And there was some bugs they introduced when they were like, oh really? They really did know what they were talking about, and we should have done it this way, and they had to like reverse. So it's extremely similar to other languages, and it does optionally type, kind of like a JavaScript kind of thing. It compiles both ahead of time or just in time. And Flutter uses both. Ahead of time would be you take all your code, you package that together so it could run on the app itself. Just in time, for at least for Flutter, would be you're actually writing code. It's running in the app, and as you are writing it, it is updating the app real time, so that you can see what you're doing right on the app. I'm sorry, on the phone while you're writing. It supports asynchronous program very nicely, and it has factory constructors, which I find really kind of cool. I had not really seen that before. Dart's subtext is usually like they're all about just, we'll let you do what you want to do, and we're going to get out of your way as fast as possible. And it makes for some rapid stuff. So a factory constructor is, you have this instance of this login service class here. Yeah. So we have this login service class. We have this instance. When it first is loaded, it doesn't have a value. It runs into this login service class, factory constructor. And it says, okay, if it's equal to null, I will create an HTTP service for you. And then I will call this private constructor down here and set it. And why would we want to do this? Because you can test this way. You can mock. You can create your own HTTP service, which is a complete mock. Run this class. It will avoid this completely. You can call this directly. And that's pretty cool. I really liked how that worked. Another thing you can do, they have RX built in, and they use this thing called the block pattern, which stands for Business Logic Component Pattern. I've got to think that somebody at Cisco came up with that. I don't know. So you're basically, a quick RX for them is you have this pipe or stream, which is anything that goes in one side comes out the other. So the input of that is a sink, and output is a stream. With a block pattern class, you give it no other way of accessing. This class is all by itself, and you can only access it either by a sink or an output stream. And to use it within Flutter, we would use a special widget called a stream builder. This gets technical, I'm sorry if there's people. So this is we're going to pretend like I'm doing a login here, and I've already clicked the button to log in. I have a class instance here called a login block, and it's going on the out stream just like we would have an output here. And then this builder is taking a snapshot of anything that comes down through this pipe, and it gets there. It's going to try to handle anything new that happens. So when it first comes in and you've hit the button, it gets the snapshot immediately. It checks to see, oh, data is loading. It doesn't have anything yet. So it's going to show this circular progress indicator while we're waiting. Eventually, the auth system gives you a login. It puts it down in the same stream. Again, this thing is listening for that. It gets a new snapshot. this time it comes in and it's like, I am not loading anymore. I have data. So there it gets its auth token and it moves away. This is really cool in Flutter worlds with state. When you change your state, you might have to rerun the whole page. A stream builder does not follow that pattern. It actually can render itself completely separate from the rest of the state, which is a little bit more inside Flutter land, but trust me, it's cool. Okay, so demo. This is where I try to figure out how to get out of here. Got it. And I have many things open. This is a standard, I wanted to do just a basic Flutter application, and then I decided, I'm going to show you the example. So when I first came into this, I started my own project that had like 1 or 2 examples, and then as I learned more and more, I would add to that example, and then I had a big list of things that I wanted to show. I hate how that works. I can't see that. Every time I try to hit my play button, it tries to tell me information about the screen share. So if I run this, oh wait, is it running? Can't even tell if it's running. Performing hot start. Good job. Well, while waiting for that to cook, what is this doing? Oh, okay. It's already running. There we go. So we have a bunch of different little examples of different things you can do. I'm going to go through some of this. Can you see this code okay? Let's do this. We'll go to presentation mode. So at the top of our class, we have this is like your standard, you're going in to run an app. You set a main function, and here is my main stateless widget, my app, which is the same app that I'm creating here. And I'm just creating a material app, and I'm going to cause this my home app page to run. I did do something a little fancy here where I set up some routes beforehand, just so I could do a name. I could just call a name and then have that run that particular class for me. And if I go down here to my build function, I just have let's see here. These are just regular standard functions that are trying to help me do some stuff. But I'm going to go all the way down to my scaffolding and show you, this is in Android, just doing a standard list view, you might have to have a couple different things set up. In Flutter, it is literally just like a list view, and it handles everything for you. It's very nice. And I just have some of these functions that I passed by building these rows, which are, if I go out of here, or what we see on the screen. Let's exit presentation mode. And that brings us to here. If I can do all types of different little things if these work. Great. And that's a simple fade in, fade out based on the state value. And if I go, because who doesn't love dogs? I have a API call to a dog API that just gives you a list of dogs. And looking at that code, if I go back here, this dog widget thing. I go back here. So here I have a simple list of dogs. It's just an array of strings. These are going to be the URLs. As soon as I come into my app, I'm going to call this load data class. I'm setting it to asynchronous, which is really cool. I have async await, and it's very well. I just find this like fascinating coming from the Android world. I have this thing. I'm making my call to my URL. I'm awaiting for the data to come back. I do a set state, which if you're using React, you should figure out that there's a set state where you can make a change. And here I'm just decoding the URL. I'm decoding the JSON. I'm getting each URL and I'm adding it to this dog's array or list. And then while it's waiting, it's showing a progress dialog, and then it just builds a simple list view. But this was put together very quickly. This is pretty cool how they did this. The other thing I wanted to show, things that I really liked was, so I could ask for things specifically on Android or iOS, and I would do that using what's called a method channel. And a method channel is just this communication layer where I can go to Android or iOS and ask it for data, and it'll pass it back to me. So at any point in a Flutter project, you can go into Android Studio for a real. It is always building an Android project, and it's always building an Xcode project that you can always go into and use on your own. And so I have this getting battery state, which is just setting up a message channel and awaiting for when I ask for that call to give me battery. If I go here and just say, here's my battery level, get my battery level, and it's at, well, it's 100%, it's an emulator. If I go into something like, let's go into Xcode, this is where I don't know how to zoom, but there is a battery channel call where I'm grabbing the method channel call from Flutter, and if it's matching up correctly with the call I want to make, it will make the call to iOS to get the battery level and then return that as a result. And it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty cool how it connects back up. I feel that I have shown a lot of code, so I would want to move on. Is there any questions about the code in particular?
Can I ask like a high level question, I guess? So with your experience with Flutter, what didn't you like about it compared to like writing native Android?
Oh, I would love to answer that question, but I think you need to stick around for the later half. I mean, you wouldn't want to miss out on anything. That would be my my hint. As soon as I can get to the back to the presentation. Let's see. That looks like it. And let's go full screen. It still works. Annoyances. They just got to release version 1. I think they're now at, I think that checked this morning at 1.2. Before 1, they had a few breaking changes that were really annoying, that you would just be wondering why things were broken all of a sudden, and then you'd find out that they had some sort of thing that they had to break. When I checked this morning, they are very organized about it. So if you are not lazy like me, who just continues wondering why it doesn't work, and you actually go to their help, they actually do have a section where they're saying, here's all these things that we changed that are broke. You are limited to what the Flutter project builds you. It is using that rendering engine to do all this stuff. They are not calling native anything on iOS or Android. The joke I heard originally was that they were using a microscope to figure out all the pixels on an iPhone. And then I met somebody at Google and they were like, that is true. And so that's what they do. So if something new comes around, you're going to have to wait for another release for them to add that in there. Platform stuff, the same pitfalls apply as a lot of these other ones. There is going to be things that are going to be problems. The big one I always come up with is it's not 50% less work. It's maybe 20% less work. You still have a lot of things that you have to pay attention to. I always say mobile development is very hard, and it's easy to say it's easy until you have to actually build something that looks good and behaves well and doesn't suck, and then it gets very hard very quickly. in this example also, I would say it's really easy to say I have one code base and I can do it, but then, it's very hard to deploy to both stores. Just deploying to one store is hard enough, but going to both, that's a lot of work. And some third-party libraries act differently between platforms. At level 11, they used Auth0 for their login, and all it's doing, you log in and it gives you a key back, and which long string, and that's all you need. Their Android, they had an Android side and an iOS side, and the iOS side, if the user goes in to log in and they cancel, you get a message back, a callback saying that they canceled. On Android, they don't. They just assume that you're timing out. And I went into GitHub and I started talking on one of their threads, and they were like, we don't see how this is a problem. On an Android, you should just wait for it to time out. And I'm like, I'm not on Android, I'm on Flutter. So I'm showing some sort of circular dialogue, and then it's kind of a bad experience. Why can't you have these two platforms work together? There's things you have to work out for. There's different kind of bugs.
So you're saying like Flutter kind of like as an API is supposed to abstract away kind of the internals of how those two things might act differently, but you're forced to handle them both even though maybe you shouldn't?
It's more of like, it's just a different thing you have to think about. If I was running just an Android app, then I would know that's the behavior of their API. But I'm writing this app that is going to hit both. It's going over to the native iOS code, and it's dealing with a different team than the Android codes that have wrote the same library. And they've never thought of, until now, it seems, that somebody might want both of those to act exactly the same. And it's just something to think about. It was a bug that we were wondering about for a while, and then I was like, this is why I'm here. I know a little bit of both. I can see why this is a problem. And the other thing I wanted to say about this real quick was, the rumor is that Google is going to use Dart and Flutter for their next Android thing, which is called Fuchsia. It's apparently already set up for that. We'll see if that actually happens, but which gets into use cases for general UI. Rapid prototyping, it's very easy to build stuff very quickly. When I interviewed for level 11 and asked me about mobile development, they were like, give us like your favorite app to use. And I was like, not my favorite app to use because I don't have enough money, but I really like the BECU app. I think it's beautiful. They have this like translucent background. There's this image behind there, and the way you scroll through is just great. I can't even show you the app without showing you how much money I don't have. So I was explaining this whole thing to them, and they're like, oh, did you ever try to like mimic that? And I was like, I've always thought about it, but I never really did it with Android. It was fine. And after the interview, I went home and I was like, I already know a little bit about Flutter. Let me just go ahead. And it was like 2 hours later, I had this app that looked very similar to the BECU app. And it was very impressive how quickly you can get up and going. The async stuff is very forward. The list view stuff is very easy. It's another use case would be easy to build custom widgets. One of the things that Google has said that might not necessarily want to build an app that looks like it belongs on iOS or Android. You might want to build something that more artistic, that looks like neither platform, and you can get away with that. They said one of the things that they always noticed was like a designer will say, we want to have some like date chooser that looks like this particular way. And then always the dev team comes back and says, can we use a native component? Because it's a lot easier. We can get that done right away. And then the designer walks away thinking like, every time I try to do something creative, I can't do that because we always want to use these native components. This actually opens the door up for them. And there's ways of importing in animations and other cool stuff, which I don't understand, to make this work right within the platform. And they have tools to do that.
So I'll just back that up. My day job, this is also my day job. Now I got two day jobs. So my ImmuKiwi website and now ZoStream is all a platform like this, that one code base that deploys to everything. And a lot of the argument is like you want each app to feel native on each platform. And I think there's definitely justification that people will expect to be on their phone and have everything feel like it belongs on their phone. But there's a strong counter argument, which I make, which is that, well, I really want that app to feel the same no matter where I am. If I'm on desktop or if I'm on mobile, if I switch to a different mobile device, when I go to the BECU app, I want it to feel like the BECU app because that's who I'm interacting with. I'm not interacting with Google when I go to BECU. I want to interact with that. I want to have that to be a consistent experience. So I definitely like that way of thinking. I argue that direction often.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. It's pretty neat how they are able to put that all in there. I didn't get a chance to do that as much as I would have wanted, but I know that they had a designer that wanted to make some calendar that was like in dark mode and it looked ugly as sin. And we were like, maybe you shouldn't do it this time, but it was pretty cool that they were able to do it. And one of the guys that I worked with was able to implement the whole thing, which was pretty cool. And then you do have a single code base. So you do have, enough management and wherewithal to stick to it, you can make this work. It's not 50% less, but it can pay off. And I believe that is everything I have. Let's find out. The next slide is not going anywhere. You can drop in the native anytime you want. That is super cool too. And then now or ever.
Quick question. So I know we prototype like for mobility, the React Native, right? And I wasn't involved in the very beginning or whatever, but was Flutter even ever mentioned? I mean, like the app that they have us built is so simple. Would you suggest like, if previous you would have been here like sooner, would you have suggested, hey, this is like a good candidate for Flutter?
Previous me, 1 week into this project, said that Flutter would have done it. Mm-hmm. No doubt.
The reason we went with React Native was because their backend stuff, and we knew the Outlook app, which eventually they wanted to integrate with, was React Native. That's why the reason to pick React Native. It was just to see if that is possible. The experience I had in that was that it felt like it was to get a more polished experience, like UI wise. It was very hard. You can make a basic app which does all that stuff fairly easily and pretty straightforward. But as soon as you start putting in like the finer touches to make the UI look great, then it becomes exceptionally more challenging and you end up spending way more time in doing that stuff, like for React Native at least.
My understand from React Native is they create a lot of stuff that is hooking into native components, and that gives them some problems from what I understand. And that was one of the reasons I believe Google wanted to stick to their rendering right to the Skia engine. They're staying away from native components so that they have a lot of freedom for animations and for polish. They stress that quite a bit. I would argue that they could probably, the ones that I worked with were looking pretty good. And that was before, and they were looking pretty good before we even got to polishing stage. And now I'm off script, but I'm pretty sure that I have some of their. This is a bad example because this is a black and white app. I go log in here. This is actually the off flow, so I'm not going to be able to show you this because I don't remember the password. Yeah, I know. This is what I did yesterday on the other app.
Oh, and Jason, like you have a history and previous history with writing web apps, like with React, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've also written mobile or attempted mobile with React Native, or no, not yet?
I have not done React Native other than never getting it to run.
Okay. Okay. But you seem like
projects.
You're pro, like Flutter, like giving it a try on other projects and spreading.
The thing I thought was really interesting was there was definitely, it's kind of hard because I was thinking because I had touched all these three different web, iOS, and Android. So I was kind of going back and forth between them. So I don't know if like someone that knew one would be able to have that same experience. But at the same time, the whole model with like the React flowing kind of stuff, the state management was really easy to pick up. Dart got out of my way a lot. Like it was just fine with whatever it was. There's still if then statements. There's RX that's there. You just have to look up those things and learn them. There's testing. The whole part's there. It's just a matter of taking some time out. But once you start doing it, you start doing some interesting things. We at level 11, we one of these is actually the project. You know this. We couldn't get this SVG. This is an SVG displaying. We couldn't get it to show in iOS. And we knew there was some, and I kept on saying like, I don't know what's wrong. And they were like, we don't have the right library. And I was like, I think there's something wrong with the SVG. I don't think there's anything wrong with the library we're using. And I went back to my desk and took a Flutter, just grabbed another Flutter example and put together a couple of libraries and sent that same SVG into the app, and then went back to them and was like, look, it's working in iOS. Like it is working. We're going down the wrong path. We need to worry about the SVG itself, not the library. And stuff like that. I mean, if you can be that quick, that can be really useful.
I just wanted to share, like in my experience with React Native, it seems that it's harder for people who have only done web development to do React Native than it was for me coming from a mobile platform who has never done React before, because you're still dealing with like two mobile platforms and like the flow of the mobile platform. And I would think the experience in Flutter would also be the similar, where you would be more comfortable doing it if you have previous mobile experience than learning just a different syntax of language, right?
Yeah, I can't speak for that since I have not all three, but
you showed a little bit about the sort of the battery stuff. I'm just wondering, sort of across the board, Flutter versus just native code. Is it generally harder to take advantage of the capabilities of the phone, like camera or messaging or stuff like that?
I would argue from the very beginning that any cross-platform like solution is going to have some issues with this. They have a lot of plugins. They have all the plugins for cameras and stuff like that you would see. The thing that was really useful and which helped out the client was being able to go and call up native anytime you wanted. And you can even, I mean, it's building this iOS project over and over again with everything else in this Android project. I could even build this thing and then take the iOS part and just run it straight in Xcode and debug it straight in there. And so that part I feel is like really that's where if you get comfortable with that. And that was the part that I went right away for, was like, I know we need to do this. And anytime they had a problem where they were like, we want to incorporate this library and there's no Flutter version, and we were like, okay, well, we just split here and we'll come back together once they're done doing whatever it is. So getting battery level or authenticating with a library that doesn't have a Flutter library, we can call, and we can call their natives, and then once they come back, we continue on. If there's no other questions, I'm gonna find some barbecue sauce and some barbecue. Stop that.